All right, right on. So we're trying to finish off. We're trying to finish off 1 through 14. I thought I was going to get it done last Sunday. That didn't happen. So we'll finish it off today probably. So we're at 12 through 14. So Colossians chapter 3 verses 12 through 14 is where we're going to have. To give context to where we're going, of course, in the first part of chapter 3, he's letting us know that we are raised with Christ. We need to make sure that we seek and that we set our mind on things where Christ is, because of the new life that we have. Those things are all part of what we all share in together as believers. And we need to make sure that we are focusing ourselves in that direction, right? To that end, he gave us a big laundry list of things. Since you're this new creation in Christ, don't do this other stuff. It's unnecessary. And, during our church service, we're going over, the first 6 verses in Psalm chapter 1. And you'll see that there are people, there are influences, there are things that can easily sway us. And sometimes there's even things that we do now. Maybe they're habits that we picked up that we didn't even realize. I think of, I watched that one commercial that they have out there. I think it's a progressive commercial where there's like a woman and there's a guy that are progressive shaming. Like the ladies at like a soccer game or something like that, and they say something like, say something, and this lady comes back with a comeback like, "Oh, well, with all that money you saved, you could do this, that, or the other." You know what I mean? And sometimes we just get those habits that we do things, and they're so silly, and we don't think about them, but they could be of something that is a detriment to us, and to be able to move forward with our service to the Lord and with our relationship with Him. So these things are a laundry list of things that we maybe want to try and separate ourselves from. These things are definite bad red flags in our lives that we need to get rid of. A lot of them are huge red flags. So we need to make sure that we're refocusing ourselves. As we looked at them, and as I told you, they are all separated by these kind of lines into 3 kind of categories, so to speak. This is kind of sensual or sexual or kind of a lustful category. This category deals a little bit more with materialism, greed and idolatry type of thing. And then the last part deals more with emotions, negative emotions and things like that. So he tells us we need to, focus our heads above, seeking those things of the Lord above ourselves, setting our mind there. So we don't want to focus on these 3 areas, these 3 things that can, these 3 areas and some of the examples that he gives for them, to stay away from them. But instead, we should conduct ourselves in a different kind of a manner. And that manner that we see here, starting in verses 12 through 14, gives us he kind of bookends it. I didn't mention this before, but he kind of does. He kind of bookends God's involvement in our lives and what that looks like. And as we focus on things above, we see that God kind of bookends these wonderful things that he bestows upon us. And because he bestows those things upon us, it should be the motivating factor for what we do and how we live. The top of it, the overall, whoever you are, the overall part that should guide us and direct us is love. Love is sometimes a difficult thing to do. It's hard to love the guy who cut you off. It's hard to love the person that, said something bad about you. It's hard to love, somebody who participates in these things. But then again, the last thing that we're going to see that bookends it, it starts with love and it actually ends, I'll tell you anyway, is a spoiler alert. It ends with forgiveness. So love is what starts it all, and God forgave you. So, you were that terrible person too. You know what I mean? So if God can do it, we need to try and lean into it as well. So we'll get to that at the beginning or at the end. But right now, we just started kind of scratching the surface of these verses 12 through 14. Let me read them to you so that that you will see what we're talking about here with this list of things that kind of fold a little bit into what we're talking about here with these three areas. In verse 12, it starts off, therefore. So once again, what's the therefore? Therefore, well, it's the verses prior to us that we just talked about. Therefore, as the elect of God, we talked about that. I didn't actually write that down, but we, whoever we are, it's that eternal relationship that we have with Christ. We are, if you are the elect of God, you're people that have set aside, been chosen for His will and purpose, and that's a beautiful thing for us to know, that God loves us so much that He thought of me even before, the creation of all things. That's kind of a cool thing to think about. It says, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved. That's a descriptor of the type of people that we're talking about, those who are elect. Put on tender mercies. Now, that was the first part that we did, was tender mercies. Were you here last Sunday? Yeah, see, we didn't have a different translation to go over there. See, there it is. Heartfelt compassion. So I did the two words there, tender mercies, which in the Greek are kind of weird words there. One leans into the idea of compassion, and the other one leans into the idea of the heart. But the word itself that are used for those mercies that I read literally means bowels. Like some of your translations has that word bowels. It's hard to really imagine the heart, compassionate bowels. Does that mean what does that mean? So I have compassionate bowels. Yeah, we'll let that one go. But like I told you before, that concept of this bowels is like a Hebrew. It's kind of a Hebrew idea for the center of where you are, like the point of beginning, I guess, from who you are. It's like the seat of where affection and lies. It's kind of a Hebrew kind of a concept there. So when you hear, these compassionate bowels or these tender mercies or these heartfelt compassion, that's what it means. It means that the point of origin here inside of you. All right, that's what it's talking about here. That you love would guide you in this compassionate mercy, right? And that's what we wrote down here, bowels. I just had to write it down because I think it's funny. That's the difference between first century language and 21st century language. Compassionate bowels. So anyway, moving on from there, as we go on to this list of things that we need to embrace, and we're looking at this concept that kind of folds into this idea that kind of mirrors the opposite of what we're looking at and the bad list. On the positive list, it continues on. And it says the next thing that we have there is kindness. Kindness is pretty good. Kindness is pretty easy. I think we kind of understand what kindness is in the structure in which that word gives us. We think we know, we kind of have a good idea of what kindness is. That word kind of means moral goodness. It means integrity. That kindness. It's the word in and of itself, which is very important to understand, that it gives a sense of like choosing to do it. You know what I mean? It gives the idea of, it's an idea of moral goodness. It's an idea of integrity. It's an idea of this is who you really are. Like this is what you're really about. It's not just that you're being nice to somebody, opening the door for somebody because your mom taught you how to do that. You know what I mean? It's just like a muscle memory type of a thing. It's you genuinely care about something. You generally want to do something nice for somebody. It's a kindness there. It's a moral goodness, or it's the integrity of who you are. You do it almost unthinking because it's the character in which you operate your life under, type of a thing. That kind of kindness. I'll put kindness. Kindness. All right. The next one, we have kindness. Blah, blah, blah. Humility. Does somebody have a different word than humility? No, humility is probably the standard there for what it is. Humility always gets a bad rap, I think, the word humility, because I think the world looks at it as a sign of weakness, humility. If you're a humble person, that means you're a weak person. It means you just don't, it's usually associated with the concept of, you don't like confrontation. You don't like to stand up for yourself. So you just kind of cower in the face of adversity. Well, that's not humility. That's fear. All right. Fear and humility are not the same thing. As a matter of fact, you can be as humble as possible and yet be fearless. So that's a concept that needs to be, that word humility means modesty, right? The idea of it, the actual kind of idea of the word is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. It's a lowliness in mind as to not think of yourself more. So when you contemplate a decision that you're going to make, you understand that the decision that you make may affect more than just yourself, and that may be a deciding factor in what you do. That's humility, recognizing that there's more than just yourself on the face of the planet. Here's my soapbox. A lot of the generation that we're dealing with today, all right, a lot of the generations that we're dealing with today, the 20-somes, the college, what are those called? They're not millennials. They're Gen X? I don't know. Whatever. I don't know what they are right now. They're crazy. No, I'm just kidding. That generation doesn't always fold into this concept of humility, because that concept of modesty is taken to a degree where they only care about, they're making the decisions that maybe seem like a modest decision, but it's one that directly affects them above what affects other people around them. Their first inclination is not how is it going to affect those around me. It's how is it going to affect me, and then may it, then after that is it, other people need to accept that decision because that's the decision I'm making. It's a sad state of affairs because it puts the cart before the horse. Humility thinks of others first and then how that will affect them. Whereas a lot of the generations that we're seeing nowadays, which is kind of sad, takes it the other direction. How is my decision? I'm going to make my decision and it may affect other people, but that's not as important. So it's kind of a bummer. That's my soapbox. I'm off of it now. But humility is something that we need to make sure that we fold into ourselves. Humility. I'll just do T. Humility. Is that right? That's right. Humility. Meekness is the next one. Meekness. Meekness is a weird word. It's not one that we use. So it makes it kind of weird. Is there a different word? Do you have a different word? Gentleness. Gentleness is a little bit better. Gentleness is a better word. A really good word that you could use from this Greek word instead of meekness. Gentleness is good. One that I wrote down is mild. I like that word mild because you can communicate. I've always said this, is that you could be 100% right. Whatever discussion you're having with a person, you could be 100% right. But if you're not mild in the way you communicate it, as opposed to rough the way you communicate it, whatever you say is not going to be listened to. Whatever you say is not going to be accepted. Why? Because the manner in which you communicate yourself matters, even if you're 100% right. Because, once again, nobody changes their mind because they lost an argument. All right? It never works that way. You know, I'm right. No, you're right. No, I'm right. No, you're right. No, I'm right. No, you're stupid. No, you're stupid. Your mom's ugly. Your dad's fat. And then you start punching each other, right? That's how it works. You know, whether or not you're right or wrong, all of a sudden goes out the door. Why? Because you are not meek. You're not mild in what you do. So mildness actually matters a whole lot. I will actually put gentleness. I think that's a better word. Gentle. Gentleness. Is that right? I think that's right. It is now. Okay. And then the last one for this group is the last word that we see here, long suffering. Does anybody have a different word? Long suffering? Patience, of course. Hopefully patience is that word. Long suffering is kind of one of the old school kind of words. Patience is that. Patience is, or perseverance. Maybe your translation might say perseverance. That is the concept there of learning to deal with and be patient with other people. Why is it so important to be patient with other people? Well, that's pretty simple, because they're not you, right? You, even though it's not true, you view yourself as the center of the universe. You are the one that matters the most. I use it all the time when I'm driving down the road. If somebody's driving too slow or too fast, I think of them as either an idiot or a maniac based off of my perception, right? I should be utilizing the rules of the road, which are there, set in place to keep people, safe and whatnot. That should be the standard by which we measure things, but it isn't always. I could be driving down the road, it could be 30 miles an hour, and I want to drive 40 miles an hour because I want to get to where I want to go, and the guy in front of me is doing 30 miles an hour, and I think they're an idiot. Well, actually, they're following the standard. I'm the one that's outside of the law, right? And it makes zero sense for me to think poorly of that individual, but that's exactly what we do. Why? That patience thing. So, once again, it doesn't even matter if you're right or wrong. It's having the understanding of, patience comes into play so often when you're talking to somebody, because maybe you have a point and they have a point. Maybe you both understand your points and you have a hard time communicating those points to each other. And you could actually, more often than not, it's been my experience, you both are saying almost the same thing, but you're not communicating it properly. And then that's what causes the tension, and nobody changed their mind by losing an argument, right? That's where you get the, you're dumb, your dad's fat, no, your mom's ugly, no. And then, that's where it all comes from, is it just escalates and escalates. So patient heads, cooler heads prevail. So that patience is there. Patience, right? So that's the first group. It's kind of the group that kind of goes into this. I'll kind of go like that, because instead of thinking only about yourself, lustful thoughts, love is going to dictate compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. These are things that are going to fold into and are there to combat these things, right? Studies say that most of the time, people that delve into sexual immorality or lustful thoughts and desires and stuff like that, what the biggest thing is that they are bored, or they don't feel intellectually or time-wise even stimulated. They just have too much time on their hands, and idle hands are the devil's work, so to speak. So they just don't, because they don't have that, they don't do anything. But if you were making decisions that were based off of compassion, thinking of others first, thinking of how to be able to do things, you'll never find a time when you don't have something to do or to think about. Even the decisions that you make when you have downtime matter. right? They matter. Why? Because you're thinking about the things that you can do for other people or what can be helpful to you so that you can be helpful to other people. It gives you that wonderful, loving response on how you want to do things. Okay. We got time. Great. Next area is materialism, the materialistic kind of stuff, like the greed and idolatry. So if you look at the next set of words in our list, you start at verse 13. Verse 13 says, bearing with one another. Okay? It says, bearing with one another. Bearing with one another. Now, we just talked about the concept of patience, but this next area is bearing with one another. Why do you need, it's kind of a silly kind of a phrase. And I'll tell you why it's important here in a minute. These two areas that we're going to look at, verse 13, it says bearing with one another and forgiving one another. Okay? Bearing with one another and forgiving one another. Those two concepts are what we're going to talk about right here. To bear with and forgive. Okay, bear with and forgive. Okay, those two concepts right there are the two concepts that we deal with when we deal with kind of materialism. Why? We need to make sure that we are leaning into the idea, all right, that we are being graceful, all right, that we're being graceful with other people and being loving with other people, right? This idea of bearing with, when we think of that word bearing with, we think of putting up with. You know, that's usually what we think of, is putting up with them. I'm putting up with them. If you are loving and you're putting up with somebody, maybe you need to look at the definition of love. Because putting up with somebody doesn't sound like you're loving them. It sounds like you're just enduring them, or you're struggling to get through the time that you have with them. If you couple love with bearing with somebody else, it has kind of a different kind of a meaning. Here, it means this phrase, bearing, is actually the word bearing with is kind of added for English purposes. It means to hold up. To hold up. If you bear something, think of that concept. If you're bearing somebody's weight, that means you're holding somebody's weight. Somebody gives you something and you're bearing that on yourself. That's the concept that you need to think of. You're holding somebody up, right? So instead of being greedy for what other people have, somebody has something you want to take it from them. Instead, you need to hold up yourself and that person, even in that sense. Most of the people that have all the wonderful little toys in the world are usually buying those things because they are bored, or because they have, time and money on their hands and don't have anything else to do. They're trying to fill a void, right, that they don't have normally filled. So what is that? So what do we need to do? Well, we need to endure with them, right? We need to hold them up. We need to bear their burden. If they're wanting to go out and, do all these crazy things and stuff like that, and, somebody comes up to you and goes, you know what, I think I'm going to buy a jet ski. Oh yeah? How about instead we just go to lunch once a week? Because how many times are you really going to take that jet ski out and use it? Or maybe you will. I don't know. I had friends out in Arizona. My youth director, he had a boat, and he loved to water ski. So he used to take it all the time. Nobody questioned why this guy bought a boat, because, man, he used it all the time. He used to call me up and go, "Hey, man, tomorrow's Saturday, and I need a flag man. You interested?" You know what I mean? Because he wants to go. He wants to go. Can you drive the boat? You know what I mean? That type of thing. Okay. I'd go out with him all the time. So there's no question about why he did that, right? And I bore with him, or I bared with him, or I shared his burden with him, because he wanted to do these things and he wanted to include other people. And he always thought of, me and some of the other youth group guys that were with him, because he just cared about those things. If you're using greed as a mile marker or a measure on how successful or for your self-worth, then that's never going to be a good thing. So on the opposite side of that greed is bearing with somebody, right? The other part is forgiving, and that idea of forgive. Oh, I could have put forgiving. Forgiving one another means to give favor to another one or give grace to another one. It's the idea of restoring them from peril. If you see idolatry and the worship of that, you would think of that concept, that you would be willing or wanting to give favor to someone or give grace to another person. They're trying to go in a direction that they feel is going to solve their problems, and you know it ain't going to happen that way. So what do you want to do? You want to bear with them. You want to forgive them. You want to help them to get back onto the right track. God has told us over and over again in his word, it's not our job to judge people. God will take care of that. Okay? God's got that handled. So what are we supposed to do? Well, actually, we're supposed to love people. We're supposed to love people. That's our gig, is to love people. And he tells us that over and over and over again. So what does that look like for us? Well, sometimes that means you have to bear with somebody. Sometimes that means you got to forgive somebody because they're using a different measure for their worth or their self-worth, right? They're using stuff as a measure for their self-worth, or they're using their ideology as a measure for their self-worth. I was just listening to a radio program on the way in to church this morning about how people, use, titles to define them, and how frustrating it can be because no matter what title you have, someone else has a bigger title than you, right? And that somebody else usually doesn't deserve that title that they have, whereas you feel that you do. So if you define yourself by this constant set of, and I used to do it when I was in the secular world, I used to define myself by titles all the time. And I'd always look at the title I have, which was, I was a general manager of a store, of my own restaurant, or not my restaurant, but I was the general manager of a small chain of stores out in Grand Rapids, Michigan, when I was in my mid to early 20s. And yet I still looked at it as, well, there's other people that are doing things that are like that's not fair. You know what I'm saying? Like, really? Like that's not going to be enough? Of course it's not going to be enough. It's never going to be enough. Nothing's ever going to be enough until I start defining myself by a different slide rule, so to speak. So that's where this comes from. Now, the reason why I bring these two to you like this is because I'm out of time, but these both of these words are in the middle voice. All right? Are in the middle voice. And I've told you what that is. I'll tell you what this is really fast. The middle voice, once again, is in the Greek, the way that ancient Greek is structured. They don't really use it in modern Greek that much, but the way ancient Greek is structured is that there's you can get a verb that will describe the relationship between two objects or two subjects, like two nouns or something like that, right? This verb describes the relationship between these two things, right? So there's a passive, there's an active verb, there's a passive verb, and there's a middle voice verb, right? An active verb, say I was up, and I've explained this before, I'm up to bat, and the pitcher throws the ball, and I hit the ball. I am the main subject, right? The ball is another subject, and I myself affected that other thing. I actively affected that thing. I hit it, right? Passive is kind of the opposite. Say I get up to the ball and I go and I swing and the ball hit me, right? The ball hit me. I am the main subject. The ball is another subject, but it actively affected me. It hit me. That's that passive verb, is that it affected me. The middle voice is a combination of both those things. It means that whatever the two subjects are, they affect each other. They affect each other. And that's a beautiful thing, because if I was up, well, not if I was up to bat. If I was up to bat and the pitcher throws the ball and I hit myself with the ball, that means that I affected the ball because I hit it, and then the ball hit me and it affected me, right? So both things happened at the same time. That's the middle voice. If we're bearing with each other, we're forgiving each other in love, that means I am actively helping you, and through that, I'm actively helping myself. That instance is making me better too, right? I'm affecting it and it's affecting me. That's all done through this transaction of love. That's pretty awesome. Knowing that God can do that, just by exercising love, you can affect others, and that will affect you too. That's the transaction. And that's a beautiful thing. It's not about buying stuff. It's not about finding identity through other means. It's that transaction of love. It helps and it provides help. Pretty cool. Okay, we're done with that. I didn't get to the last bit, but we'll finish that up and move on next time. I promise. Thoughts, comments, questions? Okay, we're done. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thanks so much for this time. I hope that these things that we are kind of looking at give us the opportunity to kind of see how we can affect the world through love. You've given us this mandate. You've given us this command. Love others as you have loved us. Forgive others as we have forgiven, as you have forgiven us. These things are fundamental for who we are, because they are fundamental for what you've given to us. You loved us first. You forgave us when we weren't worth it. You did all the heavy lifting. And in turn, now that we have that love and we have that forgiveness, we need to turn around and let it affect us and let it affect others around us. We need to be loving and forgiving. Those things are going to be the cornerstone of who we are in you, so that when people experience us in their life, they're not going to see us as much as they're going to see you through us. And that's how it should be. We are the body of Christ. We are your hands and feet here on earth. We need to make sure that we're out there spreading that good news of who you are, your grace, your mercy, and the gift of your Son who made it all possible. So thank you, dear Lord, for all that you've given to us, and just help us to really just live a life that honors you. We ask it in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Okay.